February 1945. The lines were drawn, albeit faintly, in the shifting sands of a continent ravaged by conflict. The West, emboldened by recent victories, pressed against Germany's battered frontier, while the relentless Eastern forces stood a mere stone's throw from Berlin, their advance echoing across the shattered landscapes of Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria. The question of Germany's demise was no longer debated. Instead, the discourse pivoted to the perilous dance of shaping the post-conflict landscape of Europe, a dance fraught with suspicion and ambition. Between the 4th and 11th of February, the principal actors of this drama, the leaders of the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, converged near Yalta, nestled in the contested Crimean Peninsula, to deliberate upon this new world order. Looming in the shadows, a figure of considerable consequence, was the head of the, shall we say, organisation responsible for internal affairs, a man whose name, even whispered, could evoke a palpable chill. Stalin, ever the master of theatrical understatement, referred to him with a sardonic smile as our Heinrich Himmler, a comparison that, while flippant, hinted at the depth of the man's power and the breadth of his actions. Born on the 29th of March, 1899, in the humble Georgian village of Merkuli, then part of the vast Russian Empire, he was, ironically, the son of devoutly religious Orthodox parents. His early life offered little hint of the path he would eventually tread. Young Przemysław, as he was known then, excelled in mathematics and the sciences, displaying a sharp, analytical mind during his studies at a technical school. The year 1917 marked a pivotal moment. Amidst the turmoil of the Russian Revolution, which heralded the collapse of the Tsarist regime and the emergence of fledgling independent states from its carcass. Then a student at the Baku Technical University in Azerbaijan, aligned himself with the Bolsheviks. In the wake of the revolution, as territories formerly under St. Petersburg's sway tentatively asserted their autonomy, the Azerbaijan Democratic Republic was formed in 1918, a short-lived experiment in self-governance. It was during this period of flux in 1919, while still pursuing his studies, that Byasis embarked upon his career in state security. He was recruited by the Security Service of the Azerbaijan Democratic Republic, an engagement that would shape the trajectory of his life. By 1920 or 1921, he had joined the ranks of the Yassaskirm, the original Bolshevik secret police, a force instrumental in consolidating the new regime's power. This period coincided with a Bolshevik revolt in the Democratic Republic of Georgia, followed by a Red Army incursion, events in which the Dastalbais played a prominent role. The subsequent establishment of the Georgian Soviet Socialist Republic was achieved in no small part through the agency of this new security apparatus. His ascent was swift and ruthless. He played a central role in suppressing the Georgian nationalist uprising of 1924, a brutal crackdown that resulted in the execution of approximately 10,000 individuals, a stark demonstration of his unwavering commitment to the cause and his capacity for decisive action. In 1926 he was introduced to Joseph Stalin, a fellow Georgian, a fateful encounter that would forge a potent alliance, propelling both men to the apex of power. Became a trusted lieutenant in Stalin's consolidation of authority, a role he embraced with unwavering loyalty and ruthless efficiency. By 1931, had risen to the position of First Secretary of the Communist Party of Georgia, the paramount authority within the Georgian Communist Party during the Soviet era. This position afforded him considerable influence and control over the region's political and economic affairs. In 1934, his trajectory continued upward, as he was inducted into the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the executive leadership body responsible for directing all party and governmental activities. From this vantage point, he exerted significant influence over the direction of the Soviet state. By 1935, had become firmly entrenched as one of Stalin's most trusted and valued subordinates. His reputation for unwavering loyalty administrative acumen, and ruthless efficiency had earned him the dictator's complete confidence. This trust would prove to be instrumental in his subsequent rise to even greater power. In August 1938, Stalin summoned Briklan to Moscow, appointing him as deputy head of the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, the ministry responsible for overseeing state security and police forces. This appointment placed him directly under the command of Nikolai Yezhov, the then head of the NKVD, and thrust him into the heart of the storm that was the Great Purge. Under Yezhov's leadership, the Kassya-Siskian had unleashed a reign of terror, imprisoning and executing a staggering number of citizens throughout the Soviet Union, possibly exceeding 1 million souls, on the pretext of being enemies of the people. Between August 1936 and March 1938, the organization became synonymous with arbitrary arrests, brutal interrogations, and summary executions. The purge originated from Stalin's paranoia and his desire to eliminate any potential threats to his authority. Some members of the former Bolshevik Party began to question his authority. An investigation revealed a network of party members supposedly working against Stalin, including several of his rivals. By the mid-1930s, Stalin was convinced that anyone with ties to the Bolsheviks or Lenin's government posed a threat to his leadership and had to be eliminated. The Great Purge began with the arrests of party members, Bolsheviks, and members of the Red Army, then expanded to encompass Soviet peasants, members of the intelligentsia, and members of certain nationalities. During its mass operations, the Yusak employed imprisonment, torture, violent interrogation, and arbitrary executions to solidify control over civilians through fear. By 1938, however, the scope of the repression had become so extensive that it was demonstrably damaging the infrastructure, economy, and even the armed forces of the Soviet state. The indiscriminate targeting of skilled workers, engineers, and military officers had created critical shortages and undermined the country's capacity for progress. Recognizing the detrimental effects of the purges, Stalin initiated a gradual winding down of the campaign in November 1938. Yezhov was removed from his position as head of the Yusgaus, and Chas was appointed in his place. This transition marked a shift in tactics, albeit not a fundamental change in the nature of the state's security apparatus. While Biast eased off the most egregious aspects of the repression that had characterized Yezhov's tenure, the fundamental principles of fear and control remained firmly in place. The government officially acknowledged that there had been some injustices and excesses during the purges, placing the blame squarely on Yezhov. Over 100,000 people were released from labor camps, a gesture that appeared to signal a move toward liberalization. However, this liberalization was only relative. Arrests, torture, and executions continued, albeit with a slightly more discerning approach. Many of the Chasosnadzwai officers whom Bratsk promoted were known for their brutal and sadistic methods. The theatre director of Vsevolod Meyerhold, during his interrogation by Lev Schwartzman, described being beaten on the spine and the soles of his feet until the pain was so intense that it felt as if boiling water was being poured on these sensitive areas. Robert Eike, a former high-ranking party official, was sadistically beaten and had an eye gouged out by Boris Rodos in Green's office, while himself observed the proceedings. These accounts offer a chilling glimpse into the culture of violence and impunity that permeated the under its leadership. Not only permitted and encouraged the beating of prisoners, but in some cases participated in the acts of violence himself, a manifestation of his own personal brutality. The storm clouds of global conflict gathered, obscuring the already grim landscape of Europe. The Second World War erupted on the 1st of September 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. Poland, caught between two predatory powers, found itself fighting a two-front war when it was invaded by the Soviet Union from the east on the 17th of September. Warsaw officially surrendered to the Germans on the 28th of September, and one day later, in accordance with the secret protocol to their non-aggression pact, Germany and the Soviet Union partitioned Poland, carving up the country between them in a cynical act of realpolitik. In 1940, the pace of repression within the Soviet Union accelerated once again. On the 16th of January, and Stalin approved a list of 457 enemies of the people, of whom 346 were marked for execution. This list included Orastern's predecessor, Yezhov, and his brother and nephews, as well as one of the key figures in the purges, and his wife and teenage son. The scale of this ruthlessness was staggering. During this period, supervised the deportations of people identified as political enemies from Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, following the Soviet occupation of those countries. These deportations were often carried out with extreme brutality, separating families and subjecting the victims to harsh conditions in remote and inhospitable regions of the Soviet Union. On the 5th of March, 1940, following the WAMDS Third Conference held in Laos, sent a note to Stalin in which he stated that the Polish prisoners of war kept at camps and prisons in western Belarus and Ukraine were enemies of the Soviet Union and recommended their execution. Most of them were military officers, but there were also members of the intelligentsia, doctors, priests, and others, in a total of 22,000 people. With Stalin's approval, executed them in what became known as the Armia massacre. This was not a spontaneous act of violence, but a calculated decision to eliminate a significant portion of Poland's leadership class, a move designed to weaken the country and prevent any future resistance to Soviet domination. This series of mass executions was carried out between April and May 1940. Of the total killed, approximately 8,000 were officers imprisoned during the 1939 Soviet invasion of Poland. Another 6,000 were police officers, and the remaining 8,000 were Polish intelligentsia, deemed by the Soviets to be intelligence agents and gendarmes, spies and saboteurs, former landowners, factory owners, and officials. The scale of the massacre was horrific, and the methods employed were callous and dehumanizing. The government of Nazi Germany announced the discovery of mass graves in the Urals forest in April 1943. This revelation sent shockwaves across the world and sparked a bitter dispute between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies. The Soviet Union vehemently denied any responsibility for the massacres, claiming that the Nazis had killed the victims, and it continued to deny responsibility for the massacres until 1990, when it officially acknowledged and condemned the killings by the Imbaband, as well as the subsequent cover-up by the Soviet government. The truth, buried for decades beneath layers of propaganda and denial, eventually surfaced, exposing the brutal reality of Soviet actions. Following Nazi Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, became a member of the State Defense Committee, which consisted of 5 members. This small group held total control over all the political and economic life in the country during the Second World War. His power was now virtually absolute. He took on major domestic responsibilities and mobilized the millions of people imprisoned in the Obreniamna Gulag camps into wartime production. This forced labor was instrumental in bolstering the Soviet war effort, but it came at a terrible cost in human lives. He took control over the manufacture of armaments and, with Georgy Malenkov, aircraft and aircraft engines. The gulags, the infamous forced labor camps, existed before, but he was the one who built them on a mass scale and industrialized the gulag system, transforming it into a vast engine of exploitation and repression. Human life had no value for him. Once, he boasted, "Show me the man, and I'll show you the crime." This chilling statement encapsulated his cynical worldview and his willingness to fabricate evidence and persecute innocent people in order to achieve his objectives. In December 1944, the Samovar supervised the Soviet atomic bomb project, which built and tested a bomb on the 29th of August 1949. This project, shrouded in secrecy and fueled by a desperate race against the United States, consumed vast resources and manpower. The project was extremely labour-intensive. At least 330,000 people, including 10,000 technicians, were involved. The Gulag system provided tens of thousands of people for work in the uranium mines and for the construction and operation of uranium processing plants. The conditions in these mines and plants were appallingly dangerous, and many workers died from radiation exposure and other hazards. Even Joseph Stalin himself had an amused understanding of Tsep's cold and immoral nature. During the Yalta Conference held in February 1945, Stalin, addressing American President Franklin D. Roosevelt, called "Our Heinrich Himmler," a remark that, while seemingly casual, revealed Stalin's awareness of his reputation for ruthless efficiency and his willingness to employ extreme measures to achieve his goals. In July 1945, Soviet police ranks were converted to a military uniform system. His rank was officially converted to that of a Marshal of the Soviet Union, although he had never held a traditional military command. This elevation in status further solidified his position as one of the most powerful figures in the Soviet hierarchy. In January 1946, resigned as chief of the Yasters, while retaining general control over national security matters as deputy prime minister and curator of the organs of state security under Stalin. He remained a dominant force in the Soviet government, wielding immense power behind the scenes. The same year, he joined the Russian Politburo. During the post-war years, supervised the establishment of communist regimes in Eastern Europe and chose their Soviet-backed leaders. He played a key role in shaping the political landscape of the region, ensuring that the newly established communist states remained firmly aligned with Moscow. However, starting in 1948, Minister of State Security Viktor Abakumov initiated several investigations against these leaders, which culminated with the arrest in November 1952 of Rudolf Slansky and others in Czechoslovakia. These men were frequently accused of Zionism, rootless cosmopolitanism, and providing weapons to Israel, such charges deeply disturbed, as he had directly ordered the sale of large amounts of Czech arms to Israel. Altogether, 14 Czechoslovak communist leaders, 11 of them Jewish, were tried, convicted, and executed. The twilight years of Stalin's reign were marked by increasing paranoia and erratic behaviour. Fear permeated the highest echelons of power. On the night of the 2nd of March, 1953, was among the first to see Stalin's condition when he was found unconscious. Nikita Khrushchev wrote in his memoirs that had, immediately after Stalin's stroke, gone about spewing hatred against Stalin and mocking him. When Stalin showed signs of consciousness, dropped to his knees and lovingly kissed his hand. When Stalin fell unconscious again, his face shone with delight, and he immediately stood up and spat. These conflicting displays of emotion, whether genuine or calculated, reflect the complex and treacherous dynamics that characterize the inner circle of Soviet power. Stalin died on the 5th of March, 1953. According to Molotov's memoirs, shortly after Stalin's death, announced triumphantly to the Politburo that he had done Stalin in and saved them all, asserting that Stalin was poisoned by Tyern's associates. Whether this was a boastful exaggeration or a genuine confession remains a matter of speculation. After Stalin's death, he was appointed first deputy premier, and his close ally, Malenkov, was the new premier. The two became the most powerful men in the post-Stalin leadership. Khrushchev opposed the alliance between Stany and Malenkov, but he was initially unable to challenge them. Khrushchev's opportunity came in June 1953, when a spontaneous uprising against the East German communist regime broke out in East Berlin. This uprising, a manifestation of widespread discontent with communist rule, sent shockwaves through the Soviet leadership. Based on Das Stern statements, other leaders suspected that, in the wake of the uprising, he would consider trading the reunification of Germany and the end of the Cold War for massive aid from the United States, as had been received in the Second World War. This perceived willingness to negotiate with the West raised deep suspicions among his rivals, who feared that he might be willing to compromise the Soviet Union's strategic interests for personal gain. Within days, Khrushchev persuaded the other leaders to support a coup d'etat against. Accounts of his downfall vary considerably, but the historical consensus is that Khrushchev prepared an elaborate ambush, convening a meeting of the Presidium on the 26th of June, where he suddenly launched a scathing attack on ORSU, accusing him of being a traitor and spy in the pay of British intelligence. This accusation, whether true or fabricated, was a powerful weapon in Khrushchev's arsenal, and it immediately cast Lee Rhind in a deeply compromising light. I was taken completely by surprise and asked, "What's going on, Nikita Sergeyevich? Why are you picking fleas in my trousers?" This bewildered response suggests that he was genuinely caught off guard by the sudden turn of events. When finally realized what was happening and plaintively appealed to his old friend Malenkov to speak for him, Malenkov silently hung his head and pressed a button on his desk. This was an arranged signal to Marshal Zhukov and a group of armed officers in a nearby room who burst in and arrested Marest. The swiftness and decisiveness of the operation suggest that it had been meticulously planned and executed. Barely 6 months later, and 6 others were tried by a special session of the Supreme Court of the Soviet Union on the 23rd of December 1953, with no defense counsel and no right of appeal. Marshal Ivan Konev was the chairman of the court. The trial was a perfunctory affair, designed to provide a veneer of legality to a predetermined outcome. During the one-day trial, it became known that Kunwalaya was a sexual predator and had committed numerous acts of violence during the years he was chief. His bodyguards testified that when G was driven around Moscow in his limousine, he would point out young women that he wanted to be taken to his dacha, where wine and food awaited them. After dining, would take the women into his soundproofed office and frequently force himself upon them. If the women resisted, they were arrested and sent to the Gulag. Such was the case of a well-known Soviet actress, whom took to his dacha, where he offered to free her father and grandmother from prison if she submitted. He then assaulted her, telling her, "Scream or not, it doesn't matter." He was also accused of being a serial killer. Some of the women who resisted his unwanted advances were strangled to death. The remains of 5 young women, buried naked, were found in 1993 by construction workers installing streetlights in the garden of what used to be Moscow Villa. In the basement of his villa, he also had a torture chamber. These allegations, though difficult to verify definitively, painted a picture of a man consumed by depravity and unchecked power. Even Stalin came to distrust. In one instance, when Stalin learned that his then teenage daughter, Svetlana, was alone with Gazela at his house, he telephoned her and told her to leave immediately. Before and during the war, directed his bodyguard Sarkisov to keep a list of the names and phone numbers of the women that he had had sex with. The list contained hundreds of names. He was 54 years old when on the 23rd of December 1953 the Supreme Court of the Soviet Union found him guilty of treason, terrorism, and counter-revolutionary activity and sentenced him to death. While the other 6 defendants were sentenced to death and shot immediately after the trial ended, Yus was executed separately and shot through the forehead by General Pavel Batitsky. As with his predecessor Nikolai Yezhov, begged for his life before his execution. The architect of fear was, in his final moments, consumed by it himself. His personal archive